Good afternoon. My name is Lori Nickel, and I am the CEO of Second Harvest. I'd like to welcome everyone to our panel discussion, Unlocking Potential in Lockdown. It's an opportunity for us to learn about the tremendous ways businesses and foundations have found ways to support charities during these incredibly difficult time in our global history. So please take a few seconds to familiarize yourself with the Zoom features. All attendees have been muted and videos have been turned off upon joining. There will be a couple of poll questions that pop up on your screen today, and there is a chat function at the bottom of your screen that you can use to interact with us. So please send in your questions, and our panelists will try to answer as many as possible during our Q&A at the end of the session. The session is also being recorded, and we will share the recordings, answers to the polls, and highlights with all of you after the event, either by email, or you can always go to the Second Harvest website to access it. So let's begin with our first poll of the day that the wonderful Sarah Hamilton will be sharing with us.
All right, so the poll is now live. You should see the questions available on your screen. The question is, has COVID-19 affected your philanthropic priorities? And your options are in the short term only, in the long term only, in both the short and long term, has had no effect on funding priorities, or I don't know. So we'll give it a minute just for everybody to select their answers. Still seeing a couple more answers coming in. Okay, I think that's most of you have answered now. So I will close that and we will share the results. So it looks like for the majority of people, a small majority, it's affected both short and long term, although there's a decent number as well who answered short term or no effect.
Fantastic. Thanks so much, Sarah. So I want to thank everyone for joining us today, and a special thanks to the Daniels Corporation for helping us bring this event to life. While we meet today on a virtual platform, we would like to take a moment to acknowledge the Indigenous peoples of the lands that we are on today, which we all call home. We do this to reaffirm our commitment and responsibility to improving relationships between nations and our own understanding of local Indigenous peoples and their cultures. From coast to coast to coast, we acknowledge the ancestral and unceded territory of all the Inuit, Métis, and First Nations people that call this nation home. Please join me in acknowledging the harms and mistakes of the past and to consider how we can each, in our own way, try to move forward in a spirit of reconciliation and collaboration. Thank you. So, for those of you who are not familiar with Second Harvest, we are Canada's largest food rescue organizations, and we are an expert in perishable food recovery. We have a dual mission of no waste, no hunger. And our commitment is to both the planet, environmentally, and societally. We are ensuring good food, good healthy food, of which we have an abundance of, gets to people and not landfill. We have an incredible 36-year history of rescuing unsold surplus food from right across the supply chain and redirecting that food to charities and nonprofits that serve communities. I'd like to say a big thank you to our panelists for joining us today. Their breadth of knowledge and experience managing philanthropy during this very complex time in our history has been exceptional, and I know we will all learn a whole lot today. So I'd like to ask each of our panelists to take a moment to introduce yourselves, and we'll begin with Hila, please.
Thanks so much, Lori. Good afternoon, everyone. Great to be participating today, and thank you so much to Second Harvest for organizing this awesome discussion that I'm looking forward to. My name is Hila Omar-Kale. I'm Vice President of Social Impact at the Daniels Corporation. Daniels is a GTA-based builder developer that builds mixed-use communities across the Greater Toronto area. And we really focus on building community, not just the bricks and mortar, but how do we contribute to the economic, social, and sustainable fabric of each and every neighborhood we build in. And I'm so proud to say that we've enjoyed a 25-year relationship with Second Harvest. So looking forward to continuing the great work together.
Thank you so much, Hila. Farah, would you mind introducing yourself?
Yeah, thanks so much, Lori. Hi, everyone. My name is Farah Kurji, and I'm the Senior Manager of Philanthropy at TD Bank Group. My team is responsible for bringing our corporate citizenship strategy, the TD Ready commitment, to life through our philanthropy. And we're really focused on building impactful partnerships with thousands of community organizations across Canada. Really delighted to be here today.
We're just thrilled to have you. And last, but certainly not least, Sylvie, would you like to introduce yourself to everyone?
Sure. And thank you as well, to Lori and to Second Harvest for having us today. I think it should be quite interesting. So I'm Sylvie Trotze. I'm a board member with the Trotze Family Foundation. So we're a private family foundation. We're based in Montreal, but we have philanthropic activities across Canada. We've been, quite heavily involved in this COVID pandemic time, but traditionally kind of our focus areas are on education, on science, on health, and a lot on climate change and environment, which is part of how we've been supporting Second Harvest in the past because of their food rescue kind of angle, and as well just kind of supporting the local community. So again, happy to be here today.
It's fantastic, and thank you again so much for joining us today. So I think we'll start with Hila. Can you share with us how the pandemic has had an impact on long and short-term philanthropic priorities for the Daniels Corporation?
For sure. Thanks, Lori. Maybe I'll start with short term and then sort of look longer term. But in the short term, we've really at Daniels had an early emphasis on immediate priorities, such as access to food and shelter for vulnerable populations. In our corporate sort of giving strategy, we've long prioritized, access to food, access to shelter, sort of arts and culture as essentials in a community. And that's reflected in our relationship with Second Harvest. So we've engaged in a dialogue with the groups and organizations we support doing that critically important work to really understand how best our support can be used in these times. And in most cases, we've honored our existing commitments, whether they be for events and programs that were canceled, honored those commitments so that the organizations can continue that, really mission critical work through COVID that they've been doing. And, the stat that really jumps out to me, the Second Harvest stat, is that every dollar of donation provides 2 nutritious meals. So for us to, continue our commitment that we have to groups like Second Harvest annually and really double down on them through the pandemic has been a real priority. The other sort of short-term piece I want to highlight is, through the pandemic, we've really recognized that things like arts and culture and technology are no longer nice to haves, they're must haves. So being able to support artists and arts organizations to do the work that they do to keep us engaged and feeling like a community that support our mental health has been somewhere we've been directing resources. Similarly, with technology, with children out of school, especially during the first part of the lockdown, many in the community that we work in, like Regent Park, having no access to the resources like technology that they need to continue their learning. We've also sort of done some work in that area, making sure, that we're leveraging our resources, frankly, to make connections to get things like technology out into the hands of young people in our community. In terms of longer term, I think what we've looked at is how do we really look at our philanthropic priorities with the pandemic in mind, but also with the global movement for racial equality and justice. So recognizing often that the communities in need of support and facing things like housing insecurity and food insecurity, and you folks at Second Harvest know this well, are often racialized and marginalized populations. So we're really looking at, going forward, how do we do more work with the organizations we've worked with to take that equity lens in terms of racial justice and apply that to our philanthropic work as well.
That's fantastic. It sounds like you're taking a holistic and systemic approach to philanthropy at the Daniels Corporation. It's fantastic. Farah, how is it going at TD Bank? I would like to ask you the same questions on what kind of short-term and long-term philanthropic priorities are you experiencing there?
Yeah, so similar to what Gila shared, I think in the short term, much of our focus has really been on the acute needs. And so, how do we support the flattening of the curve? How do we address the short term needs of the population? But at the same time, we really need to think about the long term and how we address inequity in the system. And I think, through the pandemic, we've seen firsthand the interconnectedness of health, social, economic, and environmental issues. And unfortunately, how the pandemic is disproportionately impacting certain populations. So those from racialized or newcomer groups or Indigenous communities, as well as those who are experiencing unstable employment, insecure housing, or living in remote communities who may be, socially or geographically isolated. At TD in 2018, we actually launched the TD Ready Commitment, which is our corporate citizenship strategy, and it's really grounded in what we call 4 interconnected drivers of change: financial security, better health, connected communities, and vibrant planet. We've been really intentional not to call these pillars that operate in silos, and we could have never really foreseen, an unprecedented global pandemic. But unfortunately, COVID is a perfect example of how these things are so interconnected, and how one of these areas really impacts all of the rest. And so, for example, we know from research that's out there, there is a link between someone's financial health and their physical well-being. And so through the TD Ready Commitment, historically, and as well as through the pandemic, we've been really focused on how do we actually take our business, our philanthropy, and our people together to drive impact. And, ultimately, as a financial institution, we serve more than 25 million customers globally. And so we recognize that we have an important role to play with that. And so I'd say, beyond the philanthropic piece, which I'll touch on in a minute, from a business perspective, we've been really focused on supporting our customers, which includes small and medium enterprises, but also nonprofit organizations. And so working with them to really provide that relevant advice and insights, but also making sure that they're able to capitalize on accessing government benefits and things like that were so crucial in the early days of the pandemic. And then on the other side of that, really working with our employees. We have, close to 90,000 employees across our footprint. And so how do we enable them to make a difference in their communities and support organizations, whether that's through virtual volunteering or matching fundraising that they're doing in their own communities for organizations that are working at the front lines. I'd say from a philanthropy perspective, at the onset of the pandemic, we were very focused on directing a portion of our funds to support immediate COVID-19 recovery. So doing that in the health space especially, but also ensuring that funds make made themselves available in our regions. And so those regional offices can then take a very local approach to ensure those acute community needs are being met. And then I would say for our current grantees, we did and we continue to honor all of our existing funding commitments and provide a level of flexibility, really working closely with our community partners to figure out how they can leverage those funds in the most impactful way. For some of them, it's, using them for operational expenses and things like that, and just really being flexible. We know the situation is changing daily, hourly, and so just ensuring that we take that lens. And so I will say, we aren't changing our TD Ready commitment strategy in the long term. The crisis has really reaffirmed for us the interconnectedness of these issues and our approach to invest in programs and initiatives that really lead to that more inclusive tomorrow.
I think the big takeaway there is that interconnectedness. I love what you said about that rather than pillars, because I don't know that everybody would make that distinction, but it's so brilliant that that's the lens that we should all be looking through, because it is all connected for sure. So thank you so much for that. Sylvie, I'm going to pass on a different question for you, if that's okay. So looking at COVID as a, enormous crisis management challenge, what steps have you taken as a leader? And what have you done in your organization to get you through COVID?
I think one of the key kind of words in there is that the crisis and really the scale of it and the urgency. I think for us, we're a private family foundation, so the way we operate is maybe a bit different, and we have a relatively small board that's made up of family members. And I think, as I said earlier, one of our kind of core areas of focus is science, and that's a value that underpins quite a lot of our work, hence our focus on climate change, for example. And I think because of that, we were able to recognize what was coming quite quickly. And if we think back to end of February, early March, people were like, there's this weird virus, but I think everyone really felt it, how serious the situation was actually going to be. My sister is a virologist. She's a professor of at McGill in microbiology. And I think from that and other kind of experiences, we could see that this was going to be not a question of weeks and months, which others maybe felt it was, but a question of like at least a year, if not more, and that it was going to really affect everyone and definitely affect vulnerable communities much more strongly. And so our board got together quite quickly, in March, I think, like 1 week after lockdown, to say, listen, this is very, very serious. We're in a position, through philanthropy to play a role. Like I said, vulnerable communities are the ones most hit. And I think a large part of that is that they're also bearing a lot of the burden. So like healthcare workers, like health aides, people ensuring that the supply chain of our food systems are present. And that's part of the reason that they're often facing more of the consequences. So what can we as philanthropic actors do? We're not on the front lines in the same way, but we certainly have, I think, a role to play. And the way that we basically decided to kind of step up our funding. So obviously maintain our ongoing operations with our existing partners and so on. And some of you may have been familiar with something that came a bit after that Make Way sort of led, was a Give 5 pledge, because philanthropic foundations have a mandate to disperse 3.5% annually. So it was like a call, so like, this is a time of crisis, let's give a minimum of 5%. So that's something that our foundation had already been doing. And we'd already also decided before the pandemic to give more for climate for like the next 10 years. But also this time of the pandemic, like we need to also step up. There is the saying of saving for a rainy day. So philanthropy, this is our time. It's pouring, it's like a flood. It's not the time to be super, super cautious and like analyze the situation and like, let's figure out what we do. It's like, okay, time to step in a very serious way. So basically for 2020, we were going to be at about 14% disbursement of our endowment, which is fairly, I realize, significant and not necessarily because we're a family foundation, we kind of have that flexibility, but it's okay, it's time to do something in a serious way and not to leave people, you know, try to help where we can. And like I said, one of those areas was really focusing on, you know, communities that are most vulnerable. And we right away was like, okay, let's release some emergency funding as like an immediate first thing that we can do without spending too much time analyzing. So we'd already, you know, supported community work for, you know, since the founding of our foundation. So we basically reached out to lots of the organizations that we already had relationship with, that we knew did very, very good work, like Second Harvest, for example, and many others that were, you know, in those essential needs. So like food banks, shelters, so supporting people experiencing homelessness, those kinds of real tangible needs. And proactively just reached out to them, saying, like, we know you're going to need, there's going to be way more need during this time. Here's some additional funding. Do what you want with it. Let us know, like in 6 months, a year, what, how it was used. But that kind of, I think, principle that we saw lots of recommendations during this time to try to do unrestricted funding, you know, low key reporting requirements, you know, trust-based philanthropy kind of sort of approach in the very, very short term. So that was one of the things that we did that I think, you know, lots of actors, I think, in this space were kind of recommending that approach. And the other component that I can maybe speak to in terms of like, hopefully showing some sort of leadership is obviously in a times of crisis. There's lots of different actors involved. There's so many different initiatives. And how can we sort of help ensure that we're not repeating certain actions? How can we try to be collaborative and strategic in our approach? So we, you know, our foundation already, we kind of have a tendency of collaborating with other foundations on lots of different projects. So it was natural for us to do the same thing here. So we reached out in our networks and we ended up forming what we're calling kind of a consortium, this small group that made up of our foundation, the Saputo Foundation, Jaroslawski Foundation, and the Molson Foundation. And we actually partnered with Philanthropic Foundations Canada, PFC, to kind of do a strategic analysis of the situation. So we hired someone who has a lot of experience in pandemics, other like health crises across the world, to say, okay, speak to like government people, the healthcare workers, local organizations, other foundations, very, very quickly in a few weeks, be like, hey, what can we actually do here? And I think that kind of collaboration, it's always, you know, we talk about it a lot, and definitely we do it. And I think it's important as like kind of a way to look at how we can act in yeah, a time like this, at this level of crisis. So I'll stop there for now.
Well, that's a lot, and it's just incredible. Reacting to the urgency of the need right away. I think my favorite words that came out of your mouth were trust-based philanthropy. It's brilliant. And collaboration. I think that's the one way we've all identified the only way that we're going to fix any systemic problem is together. And so just weaving all of your stories together, I mean, it's so powerful. But what else is powerful are some of the amazing stories you must have, where you can share some real world learnings, anecdotes or stories of impact. So I will start with Gila. If you have any great stories of impact you'd like to share, that'd be awesome.
I do actually, and I'll carry on sort of Sylvie's theme of collaboration, because we've found, you know, often we can do something on our own and that's great. But if we bring others into the fold, then we can do something even greater. And we saw that early days of the pandemic. This was in March, where we heard from one of the local schools in Regent Park that a number of families did not have access to technology for young people to keep learning. This was a public school. And so we reached out to our networks to see who might be able to support with this. Big kudos to groups like Rogers Communications and Beanfield, Metro Connect that came forward and either made cash donations or donated technology for access to laptops and Chromebooks and tablets for families. And being, in construction as an essential service, we've been fortunate to be able for most of the pandemic to continue with our sort of key business operations. And we had access to one of our sales offices in Regent Park where we did 2 days of pickups. Where families would come in, social distance in designated appointment times to pick up their tablets. And, seeing most families came the parent with the child, and seeing the reactions was pretty incredible. There was a grade 3 student who came in with his mom, picked up the tablet and asked, he was very polite, asked when he should return it. And I was able to say, no, you know what, you can keep that. That's now for your family. And he looked at his mom and he said, this is the best day ever. And, it just highlighted to me, I'm on a laptop right now, we have tablets and everything in our hand. But for some folks, those pieces are so key, to enable them to keep learning, to connect with people outside their home. So that was pretty remarkable. And then the other thing I'll highlight just very quickly in terms of lessons learned in addition to collaboration is just flexibility. Seeing how agencies and organizations like Second Harvest have been able to pivot and respond. I mean, I saw the stat of 9.8 million pounds of food rescued between March and June when we were effectively in lockdown. Is pretty incredible. So a big congratulations to you, Lori, and your colleagues for really spearheading that critically important work in our city.
Thanks, Hila, and thanks for that story. I think sometimes we're so used to our own day-to-day, we forget how many people don't have what we just take for granted, and how impactful for us it's food, but technology, which we just assume everybody has and they don't. So thank you so much for that story. Farah, I believe you may have a story or two yourself.
Yeah, I feel very fortunate to hear, some of these stories daily. I mean, I think we all recognize that this has been very hard for a number of people, and that a number of nonprofits in our communities are really struggling. But I think there are signs of hope, and that's been really encouraging to hear. For those who don't know, for the last 6 years, annually we do a TD Thanks You campaign, and it's really designed to thank our customers across North America for their support and what they do day in and day out. And each year takes a bit of a theme. Last year our focus was on small business, and as we started planning for this year's campaign, we knew that we did want to deliver on that historical objective of thanking our customers and bringing those personalized moments of appreciation to life. But we also recognize that the global pandemic had wreaked havoc on the lives of millions across North America. And so we really pivoted our approach this year to showcase our customers and our employees who have really stepped up for our communities. And so we were able to tell these really personal stories about how our customers and colleagues had delivered care or services or support in their communities. And it's interesting, we go out to employees across the network for those stories, and throughout the campaign to source some of those thousands of amazing stories really emerged. And everything from, customers who delivered home cooked meals to, kids in their communities who were facing food insecurity, to colleagues who started grassroots fundraising initiatives to raise money for causes that were important to them, or colleagues who were actually making masks in the basements of their houses to make sure their communities were safeguarded. And so I think, that resilience and that determination and that hope to create a better future in the face of such hardship has been really inspiring for me and my team, and makes me really hopeful about where we go from here.
Absolutely. Like, it can be easy to get mired in the pandemic, but the generosity of people across this country has been outstanding to support many different causes throughout this pandemic. So that's wonderful to hear. I believe that the wonderful Sarah has another poll for us.
I do indeed. I'm launching that right now. This is a multiple choice poll, so you can answer to more than one of the options. The question is, how have you expanded your funding program in response to pandemic-related need? And options, again, you can pick more than one, are making larger individual donations, modifying our application process or criteria, supporting more causes, supporting more organizations, or none of the above. We'll give you a moment to answer those. And while you are answering the poll questions, just a friendly reminder that if you have any questions for our panelists, you can feel free to submit them in the Q&A section at the bottom of your screen, and we will have an option for some of those to be answered a little later in our talk today. So we'll just give that another minute for people to vote. Just a little over half of you have voted. Don't be shy. These votes are anonymous, so we won't see on the screen who voted for what. Okay, I think that's most people. So you can see a pretty good spread on the results there. We have a majority for supporting more causes, but all of the answers had a decent number of responses for various ways that funding programs are adapting to pandemic-related need.
Did it again. To our point earlier, you know, Canadians and Canadian corporations are generous, and it's lovely to see that there are more causes being supported and in different ways and in different organizations. So kudos to everybody. It's fantastic. So Sylvie, I wondered if I could ask you another question, and that is, if you could tell us what tactics can be used to support communities in an ongoing way.
Yeah, for sure. So I think supporting communities, I think we would all agree, is kind of key to a kind of a response to the pandemic. And you know, I spoke earlier about in the immediate term, you know, that kind of emergency funding going directly to communities most affected. But supporting communities is also, I would say, key to kind of a long ongoing support in actually getting, in fact, to the root causes of the pandemic itself. So I briefly spoke or mentioned earlier that our foundation, we're collaborating with a few other philanthropic actors on our COVID response. And one thing that we did was, like I was saying, kind of do an analysis of the situation and figure out, okay, where can philanthropy really be an additional actor in the situation, right? We don't want to be replacing what the government is doing, but I think we have kind of a role that we can play, right? We can act as a catalyst. We can take more risks sometimes and try to demonstrate that different types of actions actually work in practice. And kind of as just a side note example of that, our foundation, we funded a kind of this practical research project in Montreal where they're going to be actually doing surveillance testing, sort of active surveillance testing. So not just testing on people who are symptomatic, but out in the community, and then say, okay, these businesses that are on the front line, so essential workers, not in the healthcare system, but essential workers outside of the healthcare system, screening people to figure out how many people are actually positive, potentially asymptomatic, to help inform a testing strategy, you know, so, and kind of sharing that information with the public health, and, you know, they're involved in that project as well. And it's actually using saliva-based testing, so demonstrate is that effective comparing to the swabs, for example. You know, so that could be potentially a proof of concept. So those kinds of things, that would be a kind of a thematic example of a project that we've done. But one of the key kind of bigger scale projects that's taken a lot of effort on the collaboration front is what we're calling a territorial approach. which again is trying to get to those kind of root underlying causes. And that kind of community-based response to a pandemic or a kind of a health crisis is actually, you know, a recommendation from the WHO as like one of the key tenets to like an effective response. And I think from the philanthropic side, it's a bit of like of a shift in thinking. So like, you know, we were at the beginning, was like, okay, let's focus on the consequences of this, but how can we actually get to the causes of it? And to explain a little bit what that means in practice, you know, one of the first areas or neighborhoods in Montreal that we worked with was Montreal North. And if you can all think back to earlier in the pandemic, Montreal was really like the hotspot for Canada and one of the hotspots actually for the world. It was like very, still is, but very, very severely hit, and certain areas were feeling most of that in Montreal, Montreal North being one of those in particular. And the local actors there were like very, very quick, you know, it's very, very impressive. And a good example when we're talking about like these positive examples, all these actors coming together, they formed like a crisis committee. How can we coordinate our response of all these actors? And that's kind of the approach that we helped in Montreal North and also in 6 other boroughs in Montreal. So basically what it meant was we got different actors together. So like in Quebec, there's the Dictat de Quartier, which groups different community organizations, actual community organizations, people from the borough, people from public health, so like the CSIS that we have here, the Red Cross we got involved, the Centraille, which is the Quebec United Way, who also knows that space well, all to sit around the table together. They come up with a local emergency action plan for COVID, right? Because the idea is for it to be bottom up. Local communities, all those actors, they know what the needs are, and there's lots going on. So let's not have 10 different organizations all delivering food bags. How can they coordinate together and say, who needs a food delivery because they're in isolation? How can we do that effectively? And each kind of emergency plan that we ended up funding has different components that reflect the realities of those different communities. So like sometimes it's a question of there's many, many different cultural communities with different languages spoken. Okay, so there's people who speak those languages, they're going out door to door to do canvassing to raise awareness, and when they encounter people who have specific needs, put them in touch with the local organization that can provide psychosocial support, you know, food security support, whatever those needs are. So kind of that door-to-door support, transport to go get tested if people don't have a car, people are scared to use public transport. You know, we funded mobile testing clinics. So kind of that whole picture to help reduce the spread of transmission, because we know we need to support people in isolation. We know we need to support people in advance so that they feel secure, and that response needs to be tailored to the actual, I think, realities. And again, the idea is that it comes from the communities themselves. And I think the other really cool or key part of that is that it builds capacity also in and of itself, right? So I think the areas in Montreal, you know, part of the reason I think that this has worked so well, and you know, we're really hearing now we're kind of at a midpoint of those projects, so we're starting to hear back how things are going, and we had a meeting this morning about it, and we already are seeing that the cases are either staying steady or decreasing slightly, whereas other areas they're going up, right? So it's kind of stabilizing the situation, but the kind of the on the ground qualitative response is everyone saying like, this is so crucial. We're all working together. This makes sense. And now we got Laval on board. We've spoken to lots of other regions across the province. Actually, the coordinator gave a presentation to LA, the city there, because they want to maybe put something like that into place. And you know, we're speaking with the government to see how can we scale this out to the whole province. To us, this seems like such a crucial part of having kind of those tailored responses. Yep. And
I think I think it's through like that kind of community building, that kind of innovation, and getting those efficiencies together is really, and the collaboration, which we keep saying, collaboration with some organizations that may not be like right away where you think this is the right place, but then piloting something that's so successful that you can then scale, not just nationally, but internationally, is, I think, the way we have to start looking at like what's the post-COVID look like. So when these things happen again, we've tried, this is tested, this works. So just
Yeah.
kudos to you
No,
guys.
that's
and your
exactly
leadership.
right. And so, because like the other thing that in a way is a bit shocking is that you realize that most boroughs don't have an emergency plan with all of the actors and like who is good at what and who should be doing what so we don't double up. But now
It's true.
those areas have it. Let's hopefully not next time is not too soon. But I mean, even now we're talking about maybe a vaccine and a rollout there, and you need to know who are the actors to communicate. You know, there's lots of elements to all of the stages. So build capacity in the long run. And like I was saying before, part of the reason I think we had success with this is that there were previous projects in Montreal. There's the Projet Impact Collectif run by the Centraide, which was like doing these collaborative projects with local actors. So there was already that knowledge of how to collaborate. And so we were able to kind of build on that, and we brought in the scientific community. But yeah, that's kind of the idea. So we're
it sounds like that will support
and
the communities in an ongoing way for many years to come. So thank you so much, Sylvie. I'm going to pass the same question over to Gila. So what tactics are you using to support communities?
Sure, I would say maybe a little different than Sylvie in this case, where, you know, starting to think more systems level, but in the immediate for us and our sort of philanthropy and impact work at Daniels, it's really been about relationship building and, you know, focusing on those relationships. So when we are sort of honoring commitments to, you know, for canceled events or canceled programs, really having open and honest dialogue about what that means, what the organization's going to do about it. You know, that trust-based philanthropy term that we'll borrow from Sylvie. And an example of that is our relationship over the last 25 years with Second Harvest. I mean, it's always been strong, and now we're really understanding what that means, sort of as we have conversations about the best way to move forward with different events and different sort of opportunities. And we really, you know, I think our president at Daniels, Mitchell Cohen, uses this term quite a bit, and it's engagement philanthropy. Look at, you know, writing checks is important, and I encourage everyone in every organization to keep doing that. But there's so much more impact we can do as corporations, as individuals, as we engage with communities and community organizations. You know, for us with Second Harvest, that's been, you know, working with you to build and expand your offices over the years, having our employees volunteer there. At my first year at Daniels, I spent every other Friday afternoon at the Second Harvest office volunteering, you know, participating in Lunch Money Day, as it was called, the turkey drive, supporting capital campaigns, really looking at, you know, what resources beyond sort of financial support do we have to bring it to the table and support communities in a wide range of ways.
Yeah, that it always comes back to relationships, doesn't it?
It does.
That's fantastic. I'm going to change this a little bit for Farah. We know that at Second Harvest, technology has been critical to our expansion and innovation. So what technical adjustments have you made as a funder? So for example, expanding funding criteria in response to the need.
Yeah, so I'd say, you know, we've made several adjustments as part of our strategic philanthropy efforts. The first is our TD Ready Challenge, which launched in 2018. And I'm not sure how many folks are familiar with it, but it's really designed to support organizations that are developing innovative solutions for a changing world. And so each year we actually change the theme of the challenge to align with one of our interconnected drivers of change. So financial security, vibrant planet, connected communities, or better health. And generally, as part of this granting stream, we grant 10 $1 million gifts across North America, but the focus is really on that innovation piece. And so when it came down to plan for this year's challenge, we recognized that we had to do something a bit different. And if we go back to our thesis around the interconnectedness of all of these issues, we knew that COVID isn't just a health crisis; it's also a social, economic, and environmental one. And so we pivoted our challenge this year to focus on still supporting innovative solutions, but really on solutions for communities that are disproportionately experiencing the impacts of COVID. And we asked organizations applying to speak to one or more of those four interconnected drivers of change. We also recognized that demand was going to be really high this year for the challenge. And so what we did is we sliced and diced the money in different ways. And so we're actually, for the first time, doing various grant sizes as part of this challenge. And so amounts ranging from $350,000 to $1 million. And so we'll be actually announcing the recipients of those grants very shortly in the coming months. And so stay tuned for that. In addition to the challenge funding, we also do our ongoing TD Ready commitment granting. And as I mentioned earlier, we're continuing to honor all of our existing funding commitments with current grantees and really working closely with them to redirect funds where it makes sense, whether it's to COVID related response or more on the operational side of things, but really ensuring that flexibility and having those ongoing conversations. For any new funding, we've actually added a section to our application where grantees can tell us more about how they're thinking about COVID. And this isn't to create any sort of burden on organizations, but we recognize things are ambiguous and things are changing. And so want to give organizations an opportunity to be able to tell us about the work that they're doing. And that also helps us from a decision-making perspective as well. And again, things we know are changing daily or weekly, but we also recognize there are regional nuances. And so trying to bring as much of that color into our decision-making process has been really important. And then finally, I'd say we've been really trying to provide flexibility to our current grantees when it comes to reporting. We know that reporting takes a lot of time and energy. And so we've provided flexibility to all of our grantees this year and are looking at what it looks like going forward, but essentially don't want to place any undue burden on any of the organizations that we partner with.
And I, on behalf of all the charities, say thank you. Thank you, thank you, thank you. Yeah, because there is so much ambiguity. And so and I'm just so delighted that nobody actually said the word pivot, which seems like a COVID word. Before we go any further, I think we all would like to say hello to Sylvie's daughter. This is fantastic. Oh, she's gorgeous. That's wonderful.
Guest appearance.
I love the guest appearance. We do have some time. This has been a really, really great discussion, but we have a bit of time. So we're going to go to our guests and see what kind of questions they have for you. So if you could leave with one message for our attendees and philanthropic donors as we look towards a post-pandemic world, what would your one message be? And I'll throw that one to you, Gila.
Sorry, our one message for donors or donees?
Attendees and donors. So it could be both in a post-pandemic world.
Could be both. Okay, I will put on my philanthropy hat here, which is similar to my Daniel's hat, but as I'm about philanthropy, and I think Sylvie used this term, but the unrestricted giving. So really trusting that organizations and communities know best how to use their funds. So, we as donors and sponsors can sort of share what we are looking for in the areas we're looking to impact, but really leaving that to the organizations to best allocate their resources. I'm really struck by, the not-for-profit sector has operational costs and overhead costs and, human resource costs that need to be well funded to do the work that needs to be done at the level that it needs to be done at. So making sure that organizations have that support to not just do program delivery, but also make sure that their staff are compensated, that they are delivering in a way that's sustainable.
As a living wage employer, I love that response because I agree. I think it's really critical that we look at it holistically. So, Farah, if I asked you the same question, if you had one message for our attendees and donors as we look post-pandemic world, what would it be?
I think I would say share stories of hope and optimism. There's so much out there being consumed. It's easy to go into the Twitter black hole and checking the numbers every day. And there's a lot of anxiety out there. And so I think as much as we can share stories of impact and stories of hope, I think that that goes a long way. I think it's something we've been trying to do in my team a lot more. Is it's hard to feel close to the impact, and we're all navigating so many different responsibilities every day, whether personal or professional. And so I think as much as we can share those stories and remind ourselves of the why and our purpose in all of this, I think it can go a long way in terms of a hopeful recovery.
That's great advice. Look for the good. Don't just fixate on what's not so great, because there's so much great happening right now.
Yeah,
Amidst it all.
absolutely.
Sylvie, if you had one message?
Sure. I mean, I think I would happily co-sign what my other co-panelists have said in terms of like sharing positive stories, and definitely on the unrestricted funding and the kind of trust-based approach. I think that's key for now and also just going forward, right? And the other kind of component that I would maybe add to that is that, again, I think foundations and philanthropy were in this unique position where we can take more risks than other actors potentially can take to try new things and to say, okay, what can we really do to fill in some of those gaps? And that's something that, I think it's always possible to do more of. And especially with a crisis like this one, which seems so daunting, right? There's so much at play, and obviously the government and like the scientific community who are like developing vaccine and therapeutics, they're the ones that are going to ultimately help us get us out of this. But how can we help push that along, or what is that additional role that we can play? And I think we can, have an impact in that. And that same lesson I would also apply to climate change, which is another massive systemic issue, which seems maybe too overwhelming. How can we solve it? It's like, it entails everything. But again, there's levers that we can push and try to demonstrate that are impactful, that hopefully then the broader society can then adopt further.
That's great. I often say we can't boil the ocean. So let's figure out the pieces we can tackle now. And it's amazing how fast and how far you can get. So we're all in this situation together. I think everybody would be interested if you have any tips on how to encourage this behavior, this hopeful, optimistic, philanthropic behavior in your businesses with all the employees. I'm sure it's probably already happening, but if there's some businesses that are listening, they are interested in knowing that. And we'll start with you, Farah. Sorry.
Sure. So I'll start by saying I don't think I have all the answers. I think we're all learning every day how we get through this unprecedented situation together. But I like to share tactical things that I think have worked well for my team in the hopes that they benefit others. I think culturally, our team at TD is highly collaborative, and we stop by each other's desks to get things done in the old world, and we get in a room and work using a whiteboard in a room together. And so the shift from home has, I think, really been a challenge for most folks, and I've heard that through various organizations. And so, you know, within the first couple of days, we actually set up a daily touch point at 9 a.m. for my team. And it's something that we've continued. And I ask the team every day, like, do you still want to meet? But I think just having that constant has been really helpful in a way to stay connected to the work, stay connected to each other. Sometimes we use, you know, a couple of minutes of it to talk about work stuff and it veers into the personal, but I think just having something normal in a situation that isn't normal, I think has been really helpful for us as an organization. I touched on the stories of impact piece earlier, but I think, you know, figuring out ways to connect the work that your team does and highlight those stories of impact and really reaffirm for people that why or that purpose continues to certainly be important in this environment. One thing that I thought was so powerful that I've seen from a number of our leaders at the organization and has really helped set the tone is we know that things are challenging and hard and not every day is perfect.
Yeah.
And so we've actually seen our leaders acknowledge when they're having bad days. And that's really opened up the space for all of us to be honest about how we're feeling. And it's made all of us feel comfortable saying, you know what, I'm not okay today, or I'm not at my best today, or, you know, I might need some more help with X or time to go outside for a walk. And so I think ensuring that we're able to give people that space. And then I think in the same vein, and it's going to sound super hokey, but you know, my team every Friday actually carves out time to talk about what their high and their low for the week was. And it can be personal or professional, but I think it really gives us a window in terms of how everyone's doing, how everyone's feeling, and how we can support each other through this challenging time.
Thank you so much for that. And I couldn't agree more. I mean, there is no new normal. And the more open we are about how we're feeling, and it's just, that is normal. I took a Monday off and I told everybody, I hit the wall. I can't go anywhere further. And the feedback I got from the staff was, thank you. Thanks for saying that, because it just allows everyone to say it too. So that's critical. Well, we are almost at the end of our time, which boom, that went by so fast. There is a question for Lori. So if an organization, Lori being me, sorry, if an organization donates to Second Harvest, where do funds get directed to? Any changes in where it gets directed during COVID, Cindy? Well, Cindy, our organizational funds go in a myriad of places. So our donors can direct their funds. So if they perhaps live in Toronto and they really want to support the Toronto arm of our business, our distribution center and our trucks, then that's where it goes. We're also a national organization now. And so we are moving food from coast to coast to coast. So it can go pretty much anywhere. We have to pay for staff across the country. There's just general operating costs to move our food, but also to support the administration of this business. Because I think what's really important for everyone to understand about charities and nonprofits is we are a business like any other business. You know, we have the same compliance around finance, the same compliance around safety. So we operate as such. But thank you for your question. I would like to say that's a wrap, everyone. I hope you enjoyed our discussion. A big, huge thank you to our panelists for providing their time, your thought leadership, and of course the Daniels Corporation for making this possible. And just a reminder that we will be emailing out our post-event notes with this link to this video. And I want to thank you all again for attending, and don't be a stranger to Second Harvest, because again, we're all in this together. Let's keep collaborating.